Take it away, Kevin.
Thanks, Nina. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Nina, for bringing us together again for another great AIM webinar, this time with our friends from Iron Mountain. And look, many organizations are redefining their view of information governance, what it is and what it means and what it should be or what it can be, and moving away from a strict focus on compliance and data security to an expanded mindset that aims to bring more value to information as a business asset. Now, for many, optimal governance includes techniques and strategies to streamline workflows, to boost customer experience, and overall improve organizational performance. So what does that mean? And how can we do it too? And how can we make a difference in this changing paradigm? And one way is to understand the major catalysts that are moving us toward change and innovation and transformation, and what the tools and techniques that we must use to get that job done. And so that's what we're here to do today and explore in today's webinar with our guest experts on information governance and business transformation, Tom Motzel and Rob Gerbrandt from Iron Mountain. In this webinar, we'll explore the primary organizational mandates that are underway and what we can do about them, how these catalysts can align to create perhaps a new vision of information governance, how to establish a good foundation for our strategies, and what tools and techniques are really essential. So get ready for some great advice and perspective. And along the way, be sure to join us with your comments and your questions in the chat feature. We do want to hear from you too. And we will be getting to as many of your comments and questions as we can later on in the program. But for now, I would like to welcome our guests today, starting with Robert Gerbrandt. Rob is the global head of information governance and advisory at Iron Mountain. Rob's an expert in governance and risk and compliance, and has been focused on improving information governance practices and capabilities with clients across a wide range of industries. Joining Rob today is Tom Motzel. Tom is a value architect at Iron Mountain, where his deep domain experience helps him align customer needs and portfolios and sales enablement programs. He's a longstanding member of AIM, of the AIM community, and was inducted into the AIM Company of Fellows. So welcome aboard, Rob and Tom. Thank you so much for joining us today. Tom, I'd like to start with you, if I could. From your point of view, what are some of the key business transformations that are underway currently, and what should we all consider about that?
Well, thanks for having us. And I apologize for my camera not being on. I'm having some technical difficulties there all of a sudden, but oh, maybe.
Are you with us, Tom? There you are.
Thanks, Nina. All right.
Very good. Welcome aboard. All right, Tom. So what's happening currently that we should be aware of in terms of the real drivers and transformations of business today, and maybe changing our paradigm, as I put it?
Yeah. So, you know, you could certainly say that it's digital transformation and the world moving to a digital platform that's creating much of the change. But we try to think of things from the viewpoint of our customers and kind of how they're putting things in different buckets. And you know, these four buckets in front of us: workplace transformation. You know, that's true if someone is, of course, with COVID accelerating sort of the work from home and remote work situation for many employees and many organizations. That's workplace transformation. So if you're right sizing an organization today because of all of that, or that was accelerated as a result, then you know, that would probably resonate with organizations going through those types of changes. If you're, you know, an old brick and mortar retail store and you're you know, being outcompeted by Amazon, then you're really probably trying to transform the way you go to market for your customer and change the customer experience and how you're making yourself accessible to them. So that is sort of a more classic, or the way we think about digital transformation, what would be fueling a client in that case. Mm-hmm. Or perhaps all of this going digital has created more and more opportunities for data breach and security issues, of course, right? We hear all the stories all the time. And if that's a recent event or something, you're in a highly litigious area or highly regulated vertical, then data and IT security is probably one of the big catalysts for you. And then finally, of course, we're all, and all these things are sort of supported by an overall desire for sustainability and ESG initiatives. So those are kind of the drivers that we see in the market today. And if you think about a client and what their ask is, it generally will fall into one of those buckets. It can be many different things, but we kind of start here in terms of describing the market today.
And how do you feel that those factors, these business factors, are a catalyst for change for those of us in information management, and what information governance really means in terms of some of these key performance indicators? What are the major catalysts that we should be aware of?
Well, catalysts can be so many different things. And so again, we really need to listen to our customers when we think about what a catalyst might be. If there's, again, been a data breach, then that's the first most important thing for a customer to deal with, is how to resolve that situation. As they go to resolve that, they may find out there's other things that need addressing, things that need to be done in order to get to the resolution of that. If, again, they're right-sizing an organization and all of a sudden there's a greater need for digital workflows for remote employees, or for the distribution of mail or any of those things, then the catalyst is going to be that different piece, right? So yeah, there's so many different situations that can lead a client to needing to better manage their information. And the important thing is we listen to them and we start from that corner. You don't have to start in one place or the other. You have to start with the business need that is creating the urgency at that moment, and then work from there.
So Rob, tell us a bit more about your expanding view of information governance, moving perhaps away from a strictly store and protect approach to a mindset that brings more value to information as an asset. How does this expanded view help us help our organizations improve their performance?
Yeah, Kevin, I think that's the key, right? It's shifting our own point of view. We've classically, as an industry, been focused on just a discrete set of records or documents that are probably in a physical format. But today, with the rapid expansion of electronic business, those external catalysts as well as internal catalysts that are driving the need to change, to adjust how we do business, there's a real opportunity here for us to think about broadening what we view as the realm of information management or records management. We've adopted the Gartner definition for information governance because it really speaks about three critical things. It speaks about decision rights. So the rights that an individual employee has to make and has the right to have in terms of managing their information. It talks about change management and behaviors. That's often been the quiet piece of our business. We like to sort of think that we can put together a classic retention schedule, put it on the bookshelf or post it onto an intranet site, and magically people will come to it. We've all been in those same situations where on a Monday morning, we turn our computers on and there's a new icon on our desktop. How often do we actually click on that icon? Right. If we don't do that change management, if we don't sort of think about how do we actually change the habits of our people to recognize the importance of it, then we're really not thinking about it. And lastly, it's the real value perspective that what we bring to the table as an organizational point of view can really influence the profitability and the results of our organizations collectively and individually. There's a real strong story to be held here around how directly we can influence the business profitability, the business sustainability, the business risk management profiles. If we look at the broad perspective of information governance and tie together the component parts, whether that's data governance, privacy, information management, all of those other components into a single point of view around information governance.
Well, that's the changing paradigm in a sense, and the changing strategic design needs, if you will. That's a big and can be a big order. Where do we start with all of that, Rob? You talk about the first step. One clear first step is to identify our records and our content before implementing any new strategies and technologies. That seems straightforward, but tell us more about that first step and why that's so critical.
I come from a big consulting background, governance, risk, and compliance oriented consulting. And for me, it's always understanding and quantifying the current state. What are your practices today? What is happening in terms of how people understand the information, understand what is happening around your information? What is really work? What does the landscape look like in terms of the records and the content that exists across your enterprise? We've all heard the term rot, redundant, outdated, and trivial. And these numbers here represent some of the classic numbers that we typically see across organizations, where less than 10% of the content is actually records. Maybe 25 to 30% of content that's stored is needed for daily operations, which leaves about 60% of content that exists in storage, in shared drives, in boxes, as being rot, redundant, outdated, and trivial. So if you do that current state analysis to understand where you really are, that's the best first start. And from there, being able to benchmark against peers. The benchmarking against peers is always a challenge because everybody wants to think, and in some cases they're right, that there is an extreme uniqueness by industry. The healthcare industry is very specific. And yes, absolutely, they have some very particular rules and some particular language. The manufacturing industry, specific. But if we look at information governance, the practices of information governance across all industries, in fact, there's consistency. I would say that there are probably about 10 competencies that are the totality of information governance that are neutral across all industries. And if you look and you benchmark and you look at how your peers are doing from that, then you're able to really put a perspective together around what is your target operating model or your TOM look like for that future state. And from then, with those 3 early steps under your hat, you can then really start building up for that ideal future state.
We are here with Rob Gerbrandt and Tom Motzel from Iron Mountain, and we are talking about the changing paradigm of information governance, what that means, and what are some of the tools and techniques and strategies that are needed in today's environment and what that means to us. Now, Rob, you were talking about the need to get a handle on all our records and content before implementing new strategies. 60% of content you guys are finding is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. I've seen even higher numbers than that. That's astounding to me. So getting rid of that rot and getting a good baseline before I feel solid about moving forward. I mean, that's in itself a big job. What are some of the tools that are must-haves that we must have to get that job done? And what are some of the techniques that can help us do that?
I think part of the tool set here is the acknowledgement and the recognition that perfection is the enemy of good. You know, that 60% content or higher from around rot, in that ideal state, you're absolutely right. Get rid of it first. But there's a lot of challenge with that, a lot of cost to be incurred in that, a lot of, you know, habits to change to do that.
Right.
So a lot of organizations aren't prepared to actually, you know, cut off that chunk. So while we need to be aware of it, we shouldn't actually sort of anchor the future upon the remediation of that. What's more important for me is the recognition of that. You know, that volume of content is plugging up our pipes, is creating the mess for us to work with it. Once we've got that, you know, then we can actually start looking at how do we use tools that are available, whether those tools work on the physical content or on the electronic content, to go through and identify and prioritize the content that should be remediated. It's like the old debate about, you know, should I scan everything? You know, in some ways, there is an argument to be made to take everything that's in a box or every piece of paper that you create today and digitize it. But of course, there's a significant cost involved in that. And it may not be the right utilization of that asset being your bottom line dollars to actually advance the cause. So again, looking at the environment, looking at the higher risk areas of your operations, and looking to get some, I'm going to say, early wins into your equation so that you can start building for success. And eventually, you'll get to that point where you may not have solved for the rot conversation entirely, but if you solve for the conversation where around the C-suite table, there's a conversation about information governance, about the value of information, that's a brilliant step. If you've got that conversation going on at your board level as well, kudos. That's the real gold standard, so that everybody starts thinking about it. We think about it at that board level. There are conversations from a CISO side of the house around, you know, security and penetration and cybersecurity and all of that. Information governance plays hand in hand in the conversations of cybersecurity. I've often said there's no sense in having a hugely thick and tall castle wall if what's inside that castle is a dying garden.
All right, Tom and Rob, you know, I always like to ask how this plays out in the real world and how folks are actually putting some of these ideas and techniques to success. How are your customers seeing success? Can you give us an example of an organization that's been successful, particularly successful? What did they do? What were the results, and how can we do it too?
Sure. Let me start with this one, with the one on the left. a client in the UK, a government agency. In this case, it's the government agency that provides the access to wills and probates for the United Kingdom itself. The challenge that they had was they had a lot of people constantly trying to get access to individual copies of wills and everything else. And they weren't able to quickly and effectively respond to those in a timely manner that met their obligations to the population. So we were able to work with them to develop a solution approach that actually automates that ability from that end user to be able to go in to a portal, define a few characteristics around the will, around the individual request, and then to be able to quickly get that will back. That has been really, really effective, as you see on some of the stats here. First day, 5,500 orders came through, 15 times the normal solution. Over 6 million customer searches done in the first month alone. This approach changed the way that that the public in the United Kingdom were able to access this public service through His Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Services. Tom, do you want to talk about the insurance side of this?
Sure. So, as another example, a large insurance customer came to us, had a large mailroom operation in their business, and with sending people home and the onset of COVID, of course, that was a massive catalyst to try to figure out, how do we reroute these things? How do we take all this physical mail and get it to the right place? So while they had a very robust operation themselves in that regard already, when we sat down and talked to them, they started to realize there was so much more they could do. And they started to realize that so much of what they were doing in that space was outside of their core mission, of course, right? So it's kind of like they're managing a business in and of itself to take care of all that. And what we were able to do is come in and centralize all the mail sorting, digitize all the mail, deliver it digitally, of course, into everyone's inbox. And in bringing all that into one point, of course, we're also able to start applying tools of intelligent document processing and starting to look at all of that information and create rules and automations and things that will go so far beyond just delivering the mail itself. Getting the organization back to its core mission and its core focus, helping it create OpEx from what used to be CapEx. There was just so many benefits that came from doing that. And in this case, and I don't want to read the bullets on the screen, but with this client, it's 10 million pieces of mail a year, right? Which allows you to do some pretty great things in training models and getting all these benefits that weren't necessarily the first initial impetus for the project. But because we bring so many things to bear to a situation like this, we were able to go far beyond what was initially imagined.
We are here today with Tom Motzel and Rob Gerbrandt from Iron Mountain. And in just a few minutes, we will be getting to any of your questions or comments today. So please feel free to put them in the chat feature, and we'll get to them here in just a moment. We do want to hear from you and have a chance to get your comments and thoughts as well. But Tom and Rob, so we've covered a lot of things here. How can Iron Mountain help? Can you give us some next steps to consider?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, if I think about those two examples, they both demonstrate the non-traditional view of information governance, right? The non-traditional view of helping clients solve broader organizational problems and challenges. That's that view of digital transformation. It's funny. I was on LinkedIn a couple days ago, and I saw this wonderful graphic image that sort of told the story of digital transformation. And I'm sure we've all seen part of it already, if not that same one, where it's the classic view of the butterfly transformation, right? Where it goes from the caterpillar to a chrysalis into a butterfly. And that's the optimal view of digital transformation. But of course, this graphic had a second graphic right below it, which was a caterpillar, and then a caterpillar on a skateboard, and then a caterpillar on a skateboard with rocket packs tied to its back. That second one really is the reality for a lot of organizations today. You know, we're sort of comfortable with doing what we've always been doing and just sort of souping it up and hitting it faster and quicker, as opposed to really looking for that transformational level of approach. And where we're taking our clients and where we're looking to work with our clients and the industry writ large is in that point of view. You know, looking at that organizational context and content. What is working today? What are the key areas of challenge today? What are the problems that you want to solve for? Benchmarking against the maturity model, and we bring to the table our information governance maturity model that we call IG health rate, as well benchmarking against peers and the industries writ large to be able to look at, say, what is actually the best practice for you and your industry. And then that roadmap, the target operating model, the staging, the deliberate approach to building maturity of practice. This one is often a challenge for a lot of organizations because many organizations will just pick a point in the future and say, I want to get there. They don't actually plan deliberately the stages to get there. And we've often found that some organizations, some of our clients, some of our work previously, where it was positioning activities that, because the client wasn't mature enough, they weren't successful at. So we've got to recognize that through that roadmap, there is a maturity growth period. So you've got to understand, how does that play out? How do you build incremental success from there? And then working together with your own resources, with industry groups like AIIM and the others, to actually learn and share experiences across the board. That's probably the best top level view of how to approach those challenges from a next step. Tom, do you?
Yeah, I think what I would add to what you're saying is that, you know, once you know where you are, which is the first part Rob talked about, really getting a grip on what you have, because so oftentimes we don't. Those legacy records and the things that we've compiled, we just really don't have a good inventory, and we may not be aware of what it looks like to be somewhere else, which is the benchmarking piece. But the roadmap piece isn't, it's not a one size fits all kind of an operation. It's not like, here you are in the maturity model and we want to be a, you know, go from a 2 to a 5, and that's going to be the same for everyone. It always has everything to do with where the customer is and what their current pains are, which is different for every customer based on their unique organization, the industry that they're in, their past, how they've treated records, and so many different things. So you've got to look at the current business problems. So you really just have to understand, what is your unique customer's pressure? What are their objectives right now? And as I spoke to earlier, maybe it's something to do with a data breach. Maybe it's something to do with remote workers. Maybe it's something to do with the way they're delivering products and services to their customers. And you don't have to start in one spot. You just need to understand where you do need to start, where you are with those records, and then start stitching those things together. And that's where, when you're working with people that have a rich toolbox, then if all the tools are there for those unique needs, that's what defines the roadmap, right? Is where are you, what tools need to be applied to those specific things and those key points today, and how do we create the right path for that customer?
Before we get to audience questions, Rob, you mentioned earlier 10 competencies. I mean, made me curious what, from your perspective, and perhaps, we don't want to cover all 10, but what are some of the essential competencies that our audience should be thinking about? Those of us in the information management industry today, what are some of the competencies that we should be thinking about, that we should be strong in order to be effective and competitive in the next 5 years or so?
Thanks, Kevin. I think, you're right. I won't go through the 10 of them, but the top ones and probably, and perhaps some unusual ones.
Okay.
Certainly, the competency of what I call enterprise information management, creating that consistency across the totality of the enterprise. That's a really important piece of the puzzle. Adherence and awareness as a competency. How do you build it into the culture of the organization? Wouldn't it be nice if all of the line managers had in their job description, even one bullet point that spoke to the themes of information management or records management or information governance? That in and of itself is a monumental change to go forward. The business of analytics and data governance themselves as competencies in the realm of information governance are somewhat standoff, because a lot of organizations today have well-established data governance exercises, well-established analytic exercises, but they're deeply embedded in the CIO's community. Whereas, of course, the IG side of those is often off in other organizations. But to be able to bring together into a single view and a single point of view and table of conversation these previously disparate groups around data governance, around legal, around privacy, around HR compliance, bringing those people together are really going to be the advantages to going forward. But we can talk about the full set of competencies perhaps in another session in the future.
Well, Rob, you're getting at a question I think I have in the back of my mind as well. I mean, what you've explained here today makes sense to me, but how do I create that shared understanding within my organization and bring the different people together? I'm an information governance person, right? Right now I'm working within sort of my silo of operation, and other folks are working within their sphere of influence. How do we bring those folks together that may or may not have worked together in such a way to build a different paradigm and a different viewpoint that can really start to use information as an asset?
That is the challenge that we all face today. How do we extend ourselves from our comfortable little silo into the next one and the next one and beyond? The first path for success there is finding those common terms in the other silos. If you're speaking with your counterparts in the data governance world, you're going to find that they're trying to figure out common problems. How do they ensure high quality data? How do they ensure that they've got the right data for the right business decisions? How do they ensure that from a privacy perspective, they're not over retaining information and data? All of a sudden, when we listen to that, we recognize that, yeah, there's an awful lot of commonality. So it becomes, the first exercise is to knock on the door and say, what's common between our teams? And from there, being able to connect and share those practices across. It's not an easy job, I'll admit. It's one that gets fraught with a lot of protectiveness. It's my information, it's my silo, I'm charged to do this. You go away and do whatever it is you're doing. But there are ways that we can work with our colleagues to change that dynamic. Get them to understand the common ground between records retention and data retention and privacy side of the house. If you can start with that level of a conversation, you're going to be ending up miles further ahead than you would have normally.
I do want to invite anyone to bring forth their questions for Rob and Tom today. Please go ahead and type into the chat feature. We'll see if we can get to your questions as well. And Tom, I want to ask you a little bit about this idea of the impetus of information governance being the paradigm of it changing a little bit. And I think when I speak with practitioners, they understand about the innovation, perhaps the drivers that require maybe new ways of working, but they have a hard time getting a seat at the table when it comes to getting the support and the funding that they need to perhaps be innovative. You're a value architect at Iron Mountain, and so I'm expecting that you're helping clients find that value and get that ROI, to get that buy-in. Are there any techniques or strategies that you have found that have been particularly important that you can recommend to our audience that may be struggling to get that seat at the table and build that ROI for their initiatives?
Sure. That's a great question, kind of a complicated one, and I think maybe this comes on the heels of what Rob was just saying. You definitely need to understand how the payback is going to come to the organization. So the ROI is a key piece, right? And you also need to have, in addition to understanding common terms and all those things across your organization, you also have to understand everybody's position in that first. So I think the reason this gets so difficult in organizations, and there's competition for the same dollars essentially, is oftentimes because, well, the business units are working as silos, right? And they understand what they need, and they understand also what could disrupt their normal flow of day-to-day getting things done and what they're expected to do. And too often those silos aren't brought into the same room at the same time and led to an understanding of each other's sort of missions and where the future state is. So you kind of have to, you have to bring those things together. And that takes, I think that takes leadership and facilitation. Those are the kinds of things people like Rob and his teams, they can do that facilitation. That's part of the benchmarking and the work that he was talking about is oftentimes when you get the right leaders in a room and you facilitate that kind of a conversation, then all of a sudden it becomes apparent to those disparate groups why they need to start in a certain place and why that works, and it disarms them because it gets them on the same page, and instead of starting and competing with each other, it moves them in the same direction all at once. Mm-hmm. So that's important. And then again, I think another piece of your question is more about being able to understand how different pieces of content management and today's, what does it mean to the ROI if we can automate these processes, and what's standing in our way today? What pieces of infrastructure are maybe making that difficult? How do we need to reduce the complexity of that infrastructure and to get to that future state, so you kind of got to start with that ROI story sometimes. If we could operate like this would be the payback, and then how do we get there? So all those pieces kind of glue together.
And from my point of view, that ROI story starts really hinting at the changing paradigm that I'm talking about. In other words, it's more difficult to build a compelling ROI at a C-suite level if I'm only looking at things like security and compliance. I mean, those are constraints and definite business indicators for sure. They're not to be discounted, but to really build a compelling ROI takes an effort to investigate how I move the needle in terms of customer experience, revenue generation, new market penetration, not just process efficiency and security. And I think that's where the new paradigm shift is starting to happen. And that's why it's so important that we have these kinds of discussions to explore perhaps a new area that we really hadn't considered in the past that is part of the scope and framework of what we are about in terms of intelligent information management, better information governance, and so forth. Well, Rob and Tom, we're almost out of time. Before I let you go, I do want to ask one last question. I like to ask all our guests here, and if you could take just a moment to think forward a bit, what should we all be thinking about and planning for and strategizing for today in order to be prepared for the world in 5 years' time? Tom, your thoughts?
Well, I started to talk a little bit about the complexity that most environments have today. And the future is really about the interoperability of all this information. And we've got to clean it up, right? We've got to get to the right as Rob spoke to earlier, you got to get rid of the stuff that you don't need. So that's an easy sort of first cut. Easy is an overstatement, but then you need to figure out what you have left that's critical that you need to go forward with, whether that's to build new models and you need a lot of training data, or whether it's just the essential business information that you actually need to run the business. You kind of have to sort those things out. You need to have sort of a systemic governance model that's going to keep this clean going forward. When everything was on a shelf on a box, it didn't have the same capabilities that it does today. Now that it's electronic, we can use it, right? That's unlocking the power of all of this work product that we have from the past. And once you can use that to start really driving not just analytics and decision making, but the way your business works and operates, that's clearly the future. So we have to clean it up. We have to reduce the complexity of the systems that we have, so that when we are automating between these various information sources, it's something that we can do relatively easily, where today it's just not, because we have these legacy IT infrastructures in addition to the legacy records. It becomes too difficult. So I'll leave it at that and let Rob take it wherever he wants.
Rob, what are your thoughts? What should we be strategizing and thinking about now in order to be prepared for the world in 5 years' time?
I'm going to take it a little further. I'm going to say, 2030, 2035 timeframe. Two things really come out to me. Okay. First of all, we're rapidly moving in the realm of AI. And how do we ensure the value of that information and the value of the effectiveness of that AI, artificial intelligence? It's through the information layer. So how do we sort of work together with our partners, with our community, to ensure that the best product is being able to be generated from that AI through high value, high quality information? And then I'm just going to, pick up on what Jacob said in the chat. Privacy, privacy, privacy. 3035, we're going to see, I'm almost going to put a good stake in the ground, as close to universal privacy laws as we can imagine. We see that today with GDPR, with the emerging growth across the US and the US states for privacy legislations. We're seeing that in all the major jurisdictions. So the individual first perspective is also going to be a really important characteristic. And put those two things together, AI and the individual information first, that's going to be an interesting challenge that I think we, as the practitioners of the future, will be able to have a great influence over.
Rob and Tom, we do have a question here from Mark. And Mark is saying, we work in energy that drives the commuter centers. How can we protect the data security?
You know, I think that's for me, and thanks, Mark, it's computer centers, the data centers and that.
Okay, yeah.
You know, for me, I was at a conference about a month or so ago in Alberta, Canada, speaking about the intersection between cybersecurity and information governance. And Mark, that's the key here, right? It's not just operating cybersecurity, i.e. the firewall, in isolation. It makes no sense to have a really effective cyber program if you've got reams and reams and reams and petabytes of junk sitting inside the data center. So again, it's working in collaboration with ensuring that you've got a minimum information footprint, which is the highest of high value information, i.e. the records and the operational information that you need to run your business, and surround that with the most effective data security or cybersecurity approaches. I hope that answers the question.
Well, and certainly as we look at the next 5 years, it's no secret that data security will continue to be the top challenge, frankly, in terms of risk. And that hackers and cyber thieves are continuing to be ever more creative and often outstripping our measures that are put into place currently. And so as we look at the next 5 years, certainly data security is not going to go away anytime soon, and indeed be a top challenge. Well, all right, with all of that said, I would like to thank our guests today, Rob Gerbrandt and Tom Motzel from Iron Mountain. Of course, you can find them and find out more at ironmountain.com. Rob and Tom, thank you so much for being our guests today and for your comments and advice today.
Our pleasure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Everyone.
All right, well, with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Nina to help us close it out. Nina, what are your thoughts?
Absolutely. With this webinar coinciding with the AIIM's November ebook, I think it's a great time to discuss the newly published piece that AIIM has just published, the Jobs to be Done and Tools for the Job, Operationalize AIIM for Organization Success. So this ebook takes a deep dive into honing skills in 3 key functional areas, which include process improvement, information access, and data extraction analysis. So if you're interested in knowing how, this is the perfect ebook for you. Just click the link in the chat and get yourself a copy today. So this does bring us to the end of our webinar, and just a few last-minute reminders. We've recorded this webinar so you can catch anything you want to hear again in a recap email that'll be sent within the next 24 hours. A link to resources for this webinar was put in the chat. You'll find a copy of this presentation as well as additional resources through the link. Don't forget to take our feedback survey and let us know how we did. A big thank you to our underwriters, Iron Mountain. Without support from our solution providers, we wouldn't be here to bring you free educational programs. Just before we wrap up, I would like to ask Rob if he has any last-minute takeaways and comments for our audience at this time.
You know, I think the takeaway for me is, be bold as we're sort of thinking about the impact that we as practitioners can make within our organizations. Don't just be comfortable to sit back and, do what we've always done. Think about something different and choose to do that.
Absolutely. And Tom, do you have any last-minute takeaways or comments for the audience?
I agree with Rob's statement. You've got to be bold. It's not always very comfortable to change the way you think and the way you do things, but that decision really isn't ours anymore. I would say that it's happening to us fast, right? Other organizations are innovating in our spaces. We all know that, and we really need to move the needle where we are. The change is fast. It's sort of exhausting to all of us, but we know in our hearts it's only getting faster. It's not slowing down. So I think Rob's message about being bold is a good one to take to heart.
These are great points. What about you, Kevin?
Well, thanks, Nina. You know, look, as I said earlier, I think more and more organizations are redefining their view of information governance, what it is, what it can mean, what it should mean. The question for us is, how do we make a difference in the new paradigm? What are the tools and the techniques and the strategies and the capabilities that we need to get the job done? That's what we explore in these AIM webinars, and it's always my pleasure to host the discussion. So I'll just say thanks again to Tom and Rob for their advice and perspective. It's been great. I hope we get a chance to talk again soon, and thank everyone for attending today. I'll give it back to you, Nina, and we'll hope you see you next time.
Absolutely. Special thanks to Rob and Tom from Iron Mountain for joining us. And thank you, Kevin, for hosting another great webinar. Thank you guys for joining us today, and we will catch you again next time. Thank you so much, everyone. Take care.